Outside, the sun sank, casting long shadows across the clinic's brick facade. Roger paused by the door, Lily chattering about her new piano lessons. "You kept the light on," he said, his voice low, meant for Cynthia alone. Her eyes met, his, warm and searching. "You helped me find it," she replied, her voice soft, a confession wrapped in gratitude. Their gazes held, the world narrowing to the space between them. The daisies echo a heartbeat in their shared history. Cynthia stepped back, her white coat a mantle of purpose. "Come back any time," she said, her smile bright. "This place is yours too." Roger nodded, his hand closing over the keychain in his pocket. "It's yours," he said, echoing her words from years ago when she'd pressed the daisy back into his hand. Lily hugged Cynthia, her voice clear as she said, "I love you." Cynthia knelt, her eyes glistening. "I love you too, my star." They left the sedan pulling away, but Roger's thoughts lingered in the clinic with the woman whose light had reshaped him. The estate far away was warmer now, touched by Cynthia's absence but enriched by her legacy. Clara and Martin had changed, their home a place of laughter, Lily's voice its heart. Even Evelyn, softened by time, spoke of Cynthia with grudging respect, her prejudice no match for a child's clear words. Roger, mentoring youth in his city, carried Cynthia's fire, his wealth now a tool for others' dreams. In the clinic, Cynthia locked the door, her reflection in the glass a portrait of resilience. The drawings, the certificates, Jamal's photo. They were her legacy, built not on marble but on moments, on voices set free. She hummed Amazing Grace, the notes carrying her forward into a future where light didn't just shine, it grew. The daisy's truth, once a memory, was now a foundation. A story of two souls who'd found each other, not to claim but to lift, in a world forever changed by their quiet courage. The Atlanta sky burned with the gold of late spring, its warmth spilling over a quiet block where Cynthia Jones's clinic stood, no longer just a building, but a cornerstone of hope. The brick facade, once faded, now gleamed under a fresh coat of paint, its mismatched windows framing a crowd gathered for a community health fair. Children chased balloons, their laughter mingling with the hum of parents sharing stories in Spanish, Bengali, and Creole. Tables lined the street offering free speech screenings, dental checks, and stacks of Cynthia's handmade pamphlets on language development. Inside, the clinic's walls, covered in children's drawings of trees and stars, pulsed with life, a testament to voices unlocked, dreams reclaimed. Cynthia, now 31, moved through the chaos with a steady grace, her white coat swapped for a simple navy blazer, a daisy pin gleaming on its lapel, a quiet nod to a past that had shaped her. The fair was her vision, funded by grants that arrived like answered prayers, anonymous, steady, their source a secret she held close. Her clinic had grown, its 5 rooms now a hub for underserved families, where a boy's first thank you or a girl's clear "I love you" was currency richer than gold. Cynthia's braid swayed as she knelt to help a child trace a star on a mural. Her eyes, warm, unyielding, reflecting a purpose forged through years of struggle. The memory of the Gonzalez estate, its marble chill and whispered slurs, was distant now, but its lessons lingered, etched in her resilience, her refusal to iru. Across the city, the Gonzalez estate stood as it always had, its glass walls catching the sun like a monument to constancy. But its heart had shifted, warmed by the absence of a woman who'd once been invisible. Roger Gonzalez, now 38, had changed. His tech empire was no longer his sole measure. He mentored youth, funded scholarships, his wealth a tool for others' dreams, inspired by a woman whose fire had cracked his world open. The daisy keychain ever in his pocket was a talisman, a reminder of a creek, a girl, a truth that bound him to Cynthia across time. He'd seen her clinic thrive from afar, his grants a silent vow, but today, he'd come to see her, drawn by the fair's promise and a longing he didn't name. Roger arrived in a modest sedan, Lily at his side, her 10-year-old chatter now, a cascade of clear words. each syllable a tribute to Cynthia's work. They stepped into the fair, the crowd parting for Roger's quiet authority, his tailored jacket a contrast to the day's casual vibrancy. Lily spotted Cynthia first, sprinting to her with a cry of "Cynthia!" The women embraced, Cynthia's laugh a melody as Lily recounted school plays and piano recitals. Roger approached, his hazel eyes softening at the sight of Cynthia, her navy blazer a far cry from the nanny's apron, yet her warmth unchanged. "Ms. Jones," he said, his voice low, a smile tugging at his lips. "You've outdone yourself." Cynthia's cheeks warmed, her daisy pin catching the light. "It's theirs," she said, gesturing to the families, the children painting murals. "I just hold the space." Roger shook his head, his gaze steady. "You build the space. That's everything." Their eyes held, the air between them, humming with a history of gardens, libraries, and keychains. A bond not of romance but of reverence, a love rooted in seeing each other truly. Lily tugged Cynthia's hand, pointing to a table where kids practiced tongue twisters, and Cynthia laughed, leading her there, Roger following, his presence a quiet anchor. The fair buzzed, but for Roger, the world narrowed to Cynthia, her ease with a shy boy, her patient explanation of speech exercises to a mother, her voice a bridge across languages. He saw Jamal in her work, the cousin whose loss had lit her path, and felt the weight of his privilege, once a shield, now a tool, to lift her light. Clara and Martin back at the estate had grown too, their home a place of warmth, Lily's voice its heart. Even Evelyn, softened by time, spoke of Cynthia with a grudging nod, her prejudice no match for a child's clear "I love you." Roger's grants, his quiet mentorships, were his answer to Cynthia's courage, a way to honor the girl from the creek without claiming her victory. As dusk settled, the fair wound down, balloons drifting skyward, families dispersing with pamphlets and smiles. Cynthia stood by the mural, now vibrant with new stars, and Roger joined her, Lily playing nearby. "You kept the light on," he said, echoing their clinic visit, his voice thick with pride. Cynthia's eyes met his, her daisy pin glinting. "You helped me find it," she replied, her voice soft, a confession that carried years. Their hands brushed, a fleeting spark, and she smiled, her gaze lingering. "This place," she said, nodding to the clinic. "It's ours in a way, you're part of it." Roger's chest tightened, his hand closing over the keychain in his pocket. "You're the heart of it," he said, his words a vow. They parted. As the stars emerged, Roger and Lily heading to their car, Cynthia locking the clinic's door. Her reflection in the glass was a portrait of purpose, white coat or blazer. She was the same woman who'd studied in a cold library, who'd faced taunts in a garden, who'd carried a daisy's courage. She stepped into the night, her clinic's light glowing behind her, a beacon for those still finding their voice. Roger, driving away, glanced back, the keychain warm in his hand. The estate awaited, but its glass walls no longer held him. It was Cynthia's light, her legacy, that now shaped his path. In the clinic, a girl's drawing of a star hung above Cynthia's desk, beside Jamal's photo. She'd teach another child tomorrow, guide another voice, her dream no longer a fight, but a gift. The daisy pin, like Roger's keychain, was a quiet bridge, not to a romance but to a shared truth, a story of two souls who'd lifted each other, not to claim but to shine in a world forever changed by their light. Cynthia's journey, from a nanny's quiet courage to a beacon of hope, shows us that light can bloom in the darkest corners. Her daisy, her dream, her legacy remind us to see, to lift, to shine. What did her story stir in you? Share your thoughts below. How has Cynthia's light inspired you? Thank you for joining us, for letting this tale touch your heart. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with someone who needs a spark. Until next time, keep your light burning. We'll meet again soon. The party swelled, children chasing balloons, adults toasting to Lily's future. Cynthia lingered near the cake, watching Lily blow out her candles, the flames winking out under her determined puff. The room cheered, but Cynthia's heart swelled. At the girl's grin, a mirror of her cousin Jamal's long ago. As gifts were opened, dolls, books, a tiny piano, Lily tugged Cynthia's hand, pulling her to the center. "Stay," she said, her voice clearer than ever, each word a small miracle. Cynthia knelt, her dress pooling on the floor, and hugged her. "Always sweet girl," she whispered, her voice thick. Then came the moment that stilled the room. Lily, standing on a chair, her blue eyes bright, turned to Cynthia. "I love you, Cynthia," she said, her words deliberate, clear, ringing like a bell in the silence. The room froze, glasses pausing mid-air, breaths held. Evelyn's spoon clinked against her plate, her eyes widening. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, tears glistening. Martin leaned forward, his brow softening. The clarity of Lily's voice, once tangled in knots, was a testament to Cynthia's work, a truth no one could deny. Cynthia's eyes filled, her hand squeezing Lily's, her heart a storm of pride and gratitude. Roger stepped forward, his voice cutting through the hush. "To Cynthia," he said, raising his glass, "who gave Lily her voice and this house its heart." The guests clapped, a wave of sound that drowned Evelyn's pursed lips. Cynthia blushed, her head dipping, but Roger's gaze held hers, steady and warm, a silent vow that sent a shiver through her. The room resumed its chatter, but the air had shifted, charged with a new truth. Evelyn's icy demeanor cracked, her eyes lingering on Lily, then Cynthia, a flicker of doubt in their depths. She said nothing, but her silence was no longer a blade. It was a pause, a reckoning. Clara approached Cynthia, her voice low but earnest. "You've changed her," she said, nodding toward Lily. "And us. Thank you." Martin joined, his hand on Clara's shoulder. "You're one of us," he said, his words simple but heavy. Cynthia nodded, her throat tight, the weight of their acceptance settling like sunlight after a storm. Evelyn watched from her seat, her fingers tightening on her napkin, but she didn't speak, her resistance bending under the weight of Lily's voice. As the party wound down, Roger found Cynthia by the terrace doors, the night air cool against the glass. She held a glass of sparkling water, her dress catching the moonlight. "You did this," he said, his voice low, meant for her alone. "You gave her that moment." Cynthia shook her head, her smile soft. "She did it. I just showed her the way." Roger stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, a fleeting touch that sent a spark through them both. "You gave me a way too," he said, his eyes searching hers. "To see differently." Her breath caught, the space between them humming with possibility, a bond not yet named but deeply felt. Cynthia looked away, her cheeks warm, and sipped her water. "You've given me more than you know," she said, her voice barely audible, thinking of the note, the paid fee, though she didn't speak it. Roger's hand lingered near hers, the daisy keychain in his pocket a silent bridge. They stood in silence, the party's laughter fading, the estate's walls no longer a barrier but a canvas for something new. He wanted to say more, to cross the line, but the moment was too fragile, a seed not yet ready to bloom. The night ended with Lily asleep in Clara's arms, the guests departing, the estate settling into its familiar hush. Cynthia slipped away, her emerald dress a memory in the moonlight. Roger watched her go, his heart heavy with a truth he couldn't yet voice. The dining hall, now empty, held the echo of Lily's words, a sound that had shattered walls and built bridges. Evelyn retired to her room, her steps slower, her mind wrestling with a world she no longer fully controlled. The estate, for all its grandeur, was changing, its glass reflecting not just light but lives intertwined, a story still unfolding in the quiet. 2 years had passed, and the Atlanta sun dipped low, painting the city in hues of amber and rose. In a quiet corner of a bustling neighborhood, a modest brick building stood, its mismatched windows glowing with the warmth of purpose. The sign above the door read, "Cynthia Jones, Speech-Language Pathologist." Inside, the walls were alive with color. Children's drawings of stars and rainbows pinned in joyful chaos, a testament to voices reclaimed. The clinic was small, 5 rooms and a waiting area, but it pulsed with life, a heartbeat forged from Cynthia's dream. She moved through it now, her white coat crisp, her braid neat, her eyes still warm, still resolute, carrying the weight of countless victories. At 30, she was no longer the nanny who faded into shadows. She was a beacon, her legacy etched in every child who spoke their first clear word under her care. The clinic was Cynthia's sanctuary, built with grants that seemed to arrive just when hope wavered, anonymous, untraceable, but steady. She never asked their source, but her heart whispered Roger's name, the memory of his note, "Keep shining," still a talisman in her desk drawer. Her days were filled with children like her cousin Jamal, whose stutter had once lit her path. A boy with apraxia shaped his first hello. A girl with a cleft palate laughed through her new syllables, each triumph a brick in the foundation of her dream. The clinic served the underserved, families with no insurance, parents who spoke in Spanish, Creole, or halting English. Cynthia learned their languages, their stories, her voice a bridge where others saw only gaps. This evening, as the last patient left, a 6-year-old clutching a sticker for saying "Mom," Cynthia stood in the waiting room organizing files. Her walls, once bare, now held certificates, her degree, her certification, and awards from community groups. A photo of Jamal, grinning at 13, hung beside them, his memory a quiet pulse in her work. She hummed Amazing Grace, the same hymn, from her days in the Gonzalez estate, its notes softer now, woven with confidence. The weight of those years, cleaning marble floors, hiding textbooks, facing taunts in the garden, had forged her, but it was the kindness of a stranger, a boy by a creek, that had lit her way. Outside, a sleek black sedan pulled up, its engine a low hum. Roger Gonzalez stepped out, his tailored coat catching the breeze, his hazel eyes scanning the clinic with a pride he didn't voice. Beside him, Lily, now 9, bounced on her toes, her speech fluid, her blue eyes bright. 2 years had reshaped her, Cynthia's exercises unlocking her voice, but her trust in Cynthia remained a constant, a bond unbroken by time. Roger's visits to Atlanta were rare, his tech empire demanding his presence, but today was different, a pilgrimage to see, the woman who'd changed his world, whose fire still burned in his thoughts. They entered, the bell above the door chiming. Cynthia turned, her breath catching at the sight of them. "Lily!" she exclaimed, kneeling as the girl ran into her arms. "Look at you, my star." Lily grinned, her words clear and steady. "I missed you, Cynthia. I talk at school now. Everyone listens." Cynthia's eyes glistened, her hand squeezing Lily's. "You're unstoppable," she said, her voice thick. She stood, meeting Roger's gaze, and the air shifted, charged with a history only they understood. The daisy keychain, now in his pocket, was a silent thread tying their past to this moment. "Ms. Jones," Roger said, his tone warm, a playful nod to her title. "You've built something extraordinary." He gestured to the walls, the drawings, the life pulsing within. Cynthia smiled, her cheeks warming. "It's theirs," she said, nodding to the empty chairs where children sat daily. "I just give them the tools." Roger shook his head, his eyes steady. "You give them more than that. You give them hope." His words landed softly, but they carried weight, echoing the garden, the library, the night he'd held her keychain. They walked through the clinic, Lily skipping ahead, pointing out a mural of a tree, its branches painted by patience. Cynthia explained her work, free workshops, sliding scale fees, and partnerships with schools. Roger listened, his admiration deepening, not just for her skill but for her heart, which turned a modest building into a sanctuary. He'd funded the grants quietly, never taking credit, just as he'd paid her exam fee years ago. The note, "Keep shining," was his vow, renewed with every donation, a way to honor the girl from the creek without claiming her light. Lily tugged Cynthia's hand, pointing to the mural. "It's like your star," she said, referencing the hair clip Cynthia had found in the garden. Cynthia laughed, her voice a melody. "You're right, sweet girl. It's all connected." Roger watched, his chest tight, the memory of that garden, his fury, her defiance vivid again. His feelings for Cynthia had grown, not into a grand romance but a quiet reverence, a love born of seeing her truly. Their hands brushed as they stood by the mural, a fleeting spark that neither named but both felt, a promise held in silence. Cynthia's days were a relentless dance, driving Lily to school, cleaning the estate's endless surfaces, preparing allergen-free meals, and stealing hours after midnight to pore over neurogenic communication disorders and articulation therapy. Her second-hand laptop groaned under the strain of lecture videos, its battery flickering like her own endurance. She sent money to her aunt in Georgia, covering her cousin's school fees and her aunt's medication, leaving little for herself. The exam fee, $3,000, loomed like a wall, insurmountable on her wages. She'd saved a fraction, but time was her true enemy. Each night, as the estate slept, she fought exhaustion, her pencil scratching notes on dyspraxia and phonemic awareness, her heart tethered to the memory of her cousin Jamal, whose stutter she'd once eased, whose loss drove her forward. Roger Gonzalez watched this struggle from a distance, his tailored suits and boardroom poise masking a growing unease. Since the keychain's revelation, Cynthia was no longer a shadow in his home. She was the girl from the creek, the woman whose fire had cracked his world open. Her story, Jamal's death, her vow to give children their voice, had rooted itself in him, a weight he couldn't shake. He saw it in her careful steps, the way she hid her textbooks when others entered, the faint shadows under her eyes. His wealth, once a shield, now felt like a mockery against her fight. The daisy keychain, now a fixture on his desk, whispered of a debt he owed, not to the girl he'd saved, but to the woman she'd become. In the quiet of his study, Roger made a decision. He called Mrs. Harrow, the house manager, her gray bun as severe as her efficiency. "Adjust Cynthia's schedule," he said, his tone casual but firm. "Mornings only, Lily's school run, light cleaning, full pay, no questions." Mrs. Harrow's brow furrowed, but she nodded, sensing the resolve in his voice. Roger then opened his laptop, navigating to the exam's registration site. With a few clicks, he paid the $3,000 fee, listing the payment as anonymous. He printed a note, simple, typed, "Keep shining." That night, he slipped it under the door of the staff room where Cynthia kept her things, the act as quiet as his footsteps in the darkened hall. Cynthia found the note at dawn, tucked among her folded apron. Her breath caught as she read it, her fingers trembling. She checked her exam portal on her phone, expecting the usual payment pending alert. Instead, a green checkmark glowed. Registered. Tears pricked her eyes, a mix of relief and disbelief. She clutched the note, its words a lifeline, though she didn't know who'd sent it. Her heart whispered Roger's name, but she pushed the thought aside, afraid to hope. The extra hours from her new schedule were a gift she couldn't question. She spent them in the library, her studies now a fevered race against time. The estate's dynamics shifted, subtle but palpable. Clara, softened since the garden incident, noticed Cynthia's lighter workload. Over coffee with Martin, she mused, "Cynthia's been different, freer somehow. Good for Lily?" Martin, flipping through a golf magazine, nodded. "She's solid, always has been." Their approval, though quiet, was a crack in the family's armor, a warmth Evelyn couldn't abide. From the dining room, Evelyn overheard, her silver spoon clinking sharply against her teacup. "She's getting ideas," she said to Clara, her voice low, venomous. "This indulgence will spoil her." Clara, to her surprise, pushed back. "She's earned it, Mother. Lily speaks clearly because of her." Evelyn's lips pursed, but she said nothing, her silence a storm waiting to break. Roger, meanwhile, kept his distance, his actions cloaked in anonymity. He saw Cynthia in fleeting moments, her guiding Lily through a speech exercise, her humming a gospel tune as she dusted the piano. Each glimpse deepened the ache in his chest, a pull he didn't name but couldn't deny. Their keychain moment had woven them together, not with grand gestures but with a quiet understanding, a spark that flickered in stolen glances. He wanted to tell her about the payment, to see her relief, but something held him back. A fear of crossing a line, of making her dream about him instead of her. One evening, as Cynthia packed Lily's school bag, Roger passed by, his tie loosened, his hair slightly mussed from a long day. "You're doing well with her," he said, nodding, toward Lily, who was practicing S sounds with a mirror. Cynthia smiled, her eyes warm but guarded. "She's my star," she said, her voice soft. Roger hesitated, then added, "You're good for this house, Cynthia, more than you know." Her smile faltered, a blush creeping up her cheeks, and she looked away, busying herself with the bag. The air between them hummed, charged but unspoken, a moment too fragile to hold. Cynthia's exam preparations intensified. She passed practice tests, her scores climbing, but the pressure gnawed at her. She studied in her cramped apartment, the walls bare except for a photo of Jamal, his grin a reminder of why she couldn't stop. The anonymous note, now taped to her laptop, was her talisman, its words, "Keep shining," a beacon through sleepless nights. She didn't know it was Roger, but his presence lingered in her thoughts. His voice in the garden, his hand holding the keychain, his eyes seeing her truly. The estate, for all its grandeur, felt smaller now, its walls no longer just glass, but mirrors reflecting truths long ignored. Clara and Martin's support grew, their conversations with Cynthia warmer, their thanks more frequent. Evelyn's disapproval cast a shadow, but it was less suffocating, her influence waning against the light Cynthia carried. Roger, in his study, traced the daisy keychain's petals, his mind on the woman who'd reshaped his world. He didn't know she'd pass the exam, didn't know she'd earn a scholarship, but he believed in her, a faith as quiet as his gift, as steadfast as her dream. Cynthia, finishing her tasks, stepped into the library one last time before her exam. The lamp glowed, her books waiting. She opened a page, her pencil poised, and whispered, "For you, Jamal." The estate slept, oblivious to her fight, but in that light, a path forward was taking shape, carved by her hands and lit by a kindness she'd yet to name. The daisy's echo lingered, a promise of what could be, in a house where shadows were beginning to yield. The Gonzalez estate glowed under the soft sheen of twilight, its glass walls catching the last rays of a spring sun and scattering them like promises kept. Tonight, the mansion pulsed with a rare warmth, its corridors adorned with streamers of gold and blue, balloons bobbing like tethered dreams. It was Lily's 8th birthday, a celebration that softened the estate's usual austerity. The dining hall, vast and gleaming, was transformed. Linen tablecloths draped over mahogany, a cake crowned with 8 flickering candles, and laughter, bright and fleeting, weaving through the air. Yet beneath the festivity, a tension lingered, a reminder of the fault lines that ran through this family, now trembling under the weight of change. Cynthia Jones stood at the edge of the hall, no longer in her nanny's apron, but in a simple, emerald dress, its fabric catching the light like a quiet rebellion. Her braid was loose, framing her face, and her eyes, warm, steadfast, carried a nervous pride. She was here as a guest, invited by Roger, a gesture that felt both foreign and profound. Her exam, taken days ago, had left her drained but hopeful. The anonymous note, "Keep shining," still taped to her laptop, its mystery unsolved but its impact undeniable. She'd passed, she was certain, and a scholarship loomed, a path to her dream of becoming a speech-language pathologist. But tonight her focus was Lily, the girl who'd become her heart's anchor. Lily darted through the crowd, her blue dress twirling, her laughter a melody that defied her speech disorder. Cynthia's work, months of patient exercises, tapping, rhythms shaping sounds, had begun to untangle the girl's words, each syllable a victory. The guests, neighbors, and family friends mingled with glasses of champagne, their voices a low hum. Clara, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, smiled more freely now, her warmth toward Cynthia a stark shift from months ago. Martin, in a tailored blazer, clapped a friend on the shoulder, his ease a testament to his growing respect for the woman who'd steadied his daughter. But Evelyn, seated at the head of the table, was a storm cloaked in silk, her silver hair glinting, her eyes cold as they grazed Cynthia's presence. "A guest?" she'd muttered to Clara earlier, her voice sharp. "She's still the help." Roger Gonzalez moved through the room, his charcoal suit impeccable, his smile polished but strained. The keychain's truth had woven Cynthia into his thoughts, a thread he couldn't unravel. Her courage, her fire, had cracked his detachment, and the garden's confrontation, her quiet strength, had deepened his admiration into something more, a pull he didn't name but felt in every glance. He caught her eye now, standing by the dessert table, and nodded, a silent acknowledgement that warmed her cheeks. He'd orchestrated her invitation, insisting to Clara, "She's family to Lily." Clara had agreed, Martin had nodded, and even Evelyn, grudgingly, had relented. Cynthia, along with Lily, found the star-shaped hair clip among the roses. She pinned it in Lily's hair, her fingers steady despite the ache in her arm. The kid's words echoed, "You don't belong." But Roger's cut through. A lifeline she hadn't expected. She didn't know he'd seen her studying, didn't know his thoughts were weaving her into a past he couldn't yet name. She only knew the garden's warmth, Lily's trust, and the dream that burned within her undimmed by cruelty. The estate loomed behind them, its glass walls reflecting a world unchanged. But in that garden, a facade had cracked, and through it a sliver of light began to seep. The Gonzalez estate exhaled a dusky hush, its glass walls catching the last embers of twilight and scattering them like fleeting promises. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and the faint echo of a world winding down. The chandeliers hung dim, their crystals glinting like stars too distant to warm. Cynthia Jones moved through the living room, her hands folding, a stack of Lily's sweaters, each crease precise, a ritual that anchored her in a house that never quite felt like hers. Her blue blouse, still rolled at the sleeves from the garden's confrontation, bore the faint mark of a pebble's graze, a reminder of the cruelty she'd faced and the unexpected shield Roger had become. Her heart still carried his words. "You're more than their words." A spark she didn't dare name, yet couldn't extinguish. Roger Gonzalez stood in his study. The oak door closed against the estate's silence. The daisy keychain lay on his desk, its faded yellow and white threads a relic of a Texas creek, a girl's courage, a boy's fleeting heroism. Since the garden, his thoughts had circled Cynthia relentlessly, her defiance against the bullies, her arm around Lily, the fire in her eyes that matched the girl from his memory. The keychain was no longer a question but a certainty, a thread pulling taut across 2 decades. He turned it over, its texture rough against his fingers, and felt a pull deep in his chest. Not just curiosity, but something softer, more dangerous. Respect had begun to blur into a quiet ache, a longing to know her, to bridge the chasm of their worlds. He left the study, the keychain in his pocket, and crossed to the living room, drawn by the faint sound of Cynthia's movements. She stood by the fireplace, arranging Lily's sweaters on a side table, her braid loose now, strands framing her face like a halo. The room's soft lamplight bathed her in gold, and for a moment, Roger paused, struck by her presence. Steady, unyielding, yet achingly human. He cleared his throat and she turned, her eyes widening briefly before settling into their usual caution. "Mr. Gonzalez," she said, her voice low. "I'm almost done here." "Cynthia," he said, stepping closer, his tone gentle but firm. "Can I show you something?" She tilted her head, curious but guarded, and nodded. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the keychain. He held it out, its daisy petals catching the light, and watched her face. Her breath hitched, her hands freezing mid-motion. The sweaters slipped to the table, forgotten, as her eyes locked on the keychain, recognition dawning like a tide. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with a memory, long buried. She stepped closer, her fingers hovering over the keychain, afraid to touch it as if it might dissolve. Roger's gaze held hers, steady but searching. "Did you make this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "In Texas, by a creek. When you were 8. Her eyes widened, a tear glistening at their edge. She nodded, her hand finally closing over the keychain, her touch reverent as if reclaiming a piece of herself. "It was you," she said, her voice breaking. "The boy who stopped them. I gave this to you." Her fingers traced the daisies, threads, and a sob caught in her throat. "I never forgot you." The words hung between them, raw and heavy, a bridge spanning years of silence. Roger felt his chest tighten, the weight of her gratitude, her survival, pressing against him. "You were so brave," he said, his voice thick. "Even then, I kept it, not knowing why. But now—" He trailed off, the words too vast, too fragile. Their eyes met, and for the first time the walls of the estate seemed to recede, leaving only them, two souls who'd once stood together against cruelty, now facing a truth neither had expected. Cynthia's lips curved into a faint smile tinged with wonder. "You were my hero then," she said, her voice steadier now. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Roger shook his head, a breath of laughter escaping. "And you're the hero now," he said, his eyes tracing her face, the strength in her jaw, the warmth in her gaze. The air between them shimmered, charged with a connection that wasn't love, not yet, but something deeper, a recognition that defied the boundaries of their worlds. The moment was broken by footsteps. Clara entered, her blonde hair pulled into a neat bun, her expression softer than usual. She'd been in the dining room reviewing Gala plans when she'd overheard Lily talking about the garden, about Cynthia's courage. "Cynthia," Clara said, her voice hesitant, "I owe you an apology." Cynthia turned, surprised, the keychain still in her hand. Clara's eyes flicked to the mark on Cynthia's arm, then back to her face. "I was wrong about you. What you did for Lily today, it wasn't just your job. It was more." Her words were halting but sincere, a crack in the facade of her privilege. Cynthia nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Clara lingered, then left, her footsteps fading. Into the estate's hush. Roger watched her go, a flicker of hope in his chest. Clara's change, small but real, was a shift he hadn't anticipated, a ripple from the garden's confrontation. But Evelyn's shadow loomed larger. From the hallway she'd glimpsed the exchange, her silver hair glinting under the sconces. Her lips pursed, her eyes narrowing at Cynthia's presence in the living room, at Roger's closeness to her. "She's getting above herself," Evelyn muttered to Martin later, her voice ablade. Martin, sipping bourbon in the den, shrugged. "She's good for Lily," he said, echoing Roger's words from days ago. Evelyn's silence was icy, her disapproval a wall that wouldn't yet yield. Roger turned back to Cynthia, the keychain now in her hands. "Keep it," he said, his voice low. "It's yours." She shook her head, pressing it back into his palm, her fingers brushing his, a spark neither acknowledged. "You held on to it all these years," she said. "That means something." Their hands lingered, the contact brief but electric, a promise of paths not yet walked. Cynthia stepped back, gathering the sweaters, her composure returning. "I should finish," she said, but her eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there before. Roger nodded, retreating to the hallway, the keychain heavy in his pocket. The estate's silence pressed in, but it was different now, alive with the echo of a daisy, a girl's courage, a man's awakening. He climbed the stairs, his thoughts a tangle of memory and possibility. Cynthia wasn't just the nanny, not just the dreamer in his library. She was the girl who'd trusted him, and the woman who was reshaping his world. In the living room, Cynthia folded the last sweater, her heart still racing. The keychain's truth had cracked something open in her, a hope she hadn't dared to hold. She didn't know where this path would lead, didn't know Roger's heart was beginning to turn toward her. She only knew the weight of her dream, the trust in Lily's eyes, and the boy who'd once saved her, now standing closer than she'd ever imagined. The estate loomed around her, its glass walls reflecting a world unchanged. But in that quiet, a truth had bloomed, fragile but undeniable, like a daisy in a forgotten creek. The Gonzalez estate stood like a sentinel under the pale glow of dawn, its glass walls reflecting a sky bruised with clouds. Inside, the silence was a living thing, weaving through marble corridors and past chandeliers that hung like frozen stars. But beneath this stillness, a current stirred, subtle yet unyielding, carried by the woman who moved through the mansion's shadows. Cynthia. Jones folded linens in the east wing, her hands swift but careful, each crease a testament to her precision. Her blue blouse was crisp, her braid tight, but her eyes, warm, resolute, betrayed a weariness that no amount of routine could mask. The exam loomed, a mere 3 weeks away, its weight heavier than the textbook she studied each night. Her dream, becoming a speech-language pathologist, once a distant flame, now burned so close she could feel its heat, yet it threatened to consume the fragile balance of her life. Roger's breath caught. Her words weren't just a story. They were a wound, a vow. He glanced at the textbooks, their worn edges a testament to her resolve. "That's a heavy promise," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "What's stopping you?" Cynthia's smile was faint, tinged with resignation. "Money," she said simply. "The exam costs $3,000. Prep courses, study materials, more. I make enough for my aunt's bills, my cousin's school fees, but not this. I borrow books, watch free lectures online. If I pass, there's a scholarship for the program, but it's a long shot." She shrugged as if to dismiss the weight, but her eyes betrayed the ache. Roger leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gaze steady. "You're betting on yourself," he said. "That's not a long shot. That's courage." The words surprised him, raw and unguarded. Cynthia blinked, her guard slipping, and for a moment the library felt smaller, the distance between them less vast. She looked away, her fingers tracing the notebook's edge. "Courage doesn't pay the fee," she said, a wry edge to her voice. "But I can't stop, not now." Her eyes returned to his, fierce again, a spark that made the lamp's glow seem dim. Roger stood, his robe brushing the table. He wanted to say more, to promise something, but the words felt too big, too soon. Instead, he nodded. "Keep going," he said, his voice a low vow. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "And Cynthia, you don't have to hide this." She nodded, a small gesture, but her eyes held his a moment longer, a silent acknowledgement. He stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him. The estate's silence pressed in, but it was different now. Charged, alive. Roger's hand slipped into his pocket, fingers brushing the daisy keychain. Her story echoed in him, a weight he hadn't expected to carry. Her cousin's death, her fight for a future. It made his wealth feel trivial, a currency powerless against her kind of hunger. He climbed the stairs to his room, the keychain a talisman, its faded threads whispering of a girl who'd once trusted him to stand between her and harm. Downstairs, Cynthia gathered her books, her heart still racing. She didn't know why she'd told him, why she'd let her guard down. But his words, courage, keep going, lingered, a spark in the dark. She switched off the lamp, the library sinking into shadow, but the dream within her burned brighter, a flame no midnight could extinguish. The estate slept, oblivious to the shift, but in that quiet something had begun to stir. A connection, fragile but real, between a man who had everything and a woman who fought for something more. The Gonzalez estate shimmered under the afternoon sun, its gardens a tapestry of roses and lavender. their fragrance a fleeting rebellion against the mansion's sterile order. Beyond the glass walls, the world felt alive. Bees hummed, leaves rustled, and the distant hum of the city pulsed like a heartbeat. But within, the air was taut, strung tight by unspoken rules and the weight of privilege. Cynthia Jones moved through this divide, her presence a quiet stitch between the estate's cold elegance and the warmth she carried. She'd returned from picking Lily up from school, her cardigan swapped for a simple blue blouse, its sleeves rolled up as she knelt in the garden. She was searching for a lost hair clip, one of Lily's favorites, its tiny star shape glinting faintly among the rose roots. Lily, 7, trailed behind, her blue eyes clouded with a sorrow Cynthia knew too well. The girl's steps were heavy, her usual chatter replaced by a silence that clung like damp fog. Cynthia glanced at her, reading the signs, the slumped shoulders, the way Lily's fingers twisted the hem of her dress. "Sweet girl," Cynthia said softly, brushing dirt from her hands. "What's weighing you down?" Lily's lips parted, but her words stumbled, the speech disorder twisting them into a jumble. "To school," she managed, her voice a fragile thread. "They laughed." Cynthia's heart sank, a familiar ache blooming. She knelt closer, her voice a lifeline. "Tell me," slow and steady. Lily's eyes welled. "Said I talk funny?" She whispered, each syllable a battle. "Called me dumb." The word landed like a stone, and Cynthia's breath caught. She knew that pain, knew the sting of being mocked for what you couldn't change. She took Lily's hands, small and trembling, and guided her to a stone bench beneath a trellis draped in jasmine. "Listen to me," Cynthia said, her voice firm but warm. "You are enough, say it with me." She tapped a gentle rhythm on Lily's palm, a trick from her cousin Jamal's days. "I am enough," Lily echoed, her voice halting but growing stronger. Cynthia smiled, her eyes shining. "That's my star." Their moment shattered as voices, sharp, mocking, cut through the garden's hush. 3 older kids, maybe 12, sauntered from the estate's guest path, their school, uniforms wrinkled, their grins cruel. They'd slipped through the side gate, likely friends of a neighbor's child, drawn by boredom or malice. "Look, the stutter girl," one boy sneered, his voice loud enough to carry. "And her nanny," a girl added, her tone dripping with disdain. "What's a maid doing playing teacher?" The third, a boy with a smirk, stepped closer. "Go. Back to cleaning, black girl, this ain't your place." Cynthia stiffened, her pulse racing, but she kept her arm around Lily, shielding her. "Walk away," she said, her voice low, steady, though her hands trembled. The kids laughed, emboldened. "Or what?" the first boy taunted, kicking dirt toward them. Lily whimpered, clinging to Cynthia, her words lost in fear. Cynthia stood, placing herself between Lily and the group, her eyes blazing. "I said, leave," but the girl sneered, "You don't belong here," and tossed a pebble grazing Cynthia's arm. From the patio, Roger Gonzalez watched, his coffee cup frozen midway to his lips. He'd stepped outside for a moment's air, the merger, talk still buzzing in his mind when the voices drew his attention. His hazel eyes narrowed, taking in the scene. Lily's tears, Cynthia's defiance, the kids' cruelty. Something snapped in him, a fury he hadn't felt since that Texas creek years ago. He set the cup down, the porcelain clinking sharply, and strode across the lawn, his tailored jacket catching the breeze. "Leave. Now," he said, his voice a blade, calm but lethal. The kids froze, their bravado crumbling under his gaze. He towered over them, his presence a wall. "You don't get to speak to them like that. Get out." The kids scrambled, muttering excuses, their footsteps fading as they fled through the gate. Roger knelt beside Lily, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "You're strong," he said, echoing Cynthia's rhythm, tapping her palm. "Say it." Lily sniffled, her voice small but clear. "I'm strong." Roger's eyes flicked to Cynthia, who stood rigid, Her arms crossed, the pebbles faint mark red on her skin. "You're more than their words," he said, his voice softer now, meant for her alone. "More than they'll ever understand." Cynthia met his gaze, her breath uneven. The weight of his words, his defense, settled in her chest, unfamiliar and heavy. She nodded, unable to speak, her eyes glistening with something she couldn't name, gratitude perhaps, or relief. Lily tugged at her hand, and Cynthia knelt again, pulling the girl into a hug. "You did good, sweet girl," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm within. From the mansion's terrace, Clara watched, her phone forgotten in her hand. She'd stepped out to take a call, only to witness the confrontation. Her lips parted, her usual cool detachment faltering as she saw Lily cling to Cynthia. Saw Roger's fierce protection. Martin joined her, his brow furrowed. "What happened?" he asked. Clara's voice was quiet, almost to herself. "Those kids. They went after Lily. And Cynthia." She paused, her eyes on Cynthia's arm, the red mark stark against her skin. She stood her ground. For Lily. Inside, Evelyn sat in the dining room, her silver spoon stirring tea with mechanical precision. She'd heard the commotion but dismissed it as childish noise, her mind on the Gala's guest list. Clara entered, her expression troubled. "Cynthia handled it," she said, more to herself than Evelyn. "She protected Lily." Evelyn's spoon paused, her eyes narrowing. "She's paid to," she said, her tone clipped. But Clara shook her head, a crack in her usual deference. "It was more than that." Roger lingered in the garden, watching. Cynthia guided Lily back to the bench, her voice soft as she resumed their mantra. "I am enough." He felt the daisy keychain in his pocket, its threads a silent question. The fury had ebbed, replaced by a clarity he couldn't shake. Cynthia wasn't just a nanny, not just a dreamer in his library. She was a shield, a force his family had underestimated. He turned back to the house, his steps heavy, the weight of their prejudice pressing against his silence. Roger's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to a summer long past. He was 12, visiting his grandparents' sprawling ranch in rural Texas, where the air smelled of dust and wild sage. The memory was vivid, almost tactile, a creek winding through, scrubland, its banks dotted with mesquite. He'd wandered there one afternoon, escaping the adults' droning talk of oil leases. A group of kids, older, louder, had gathered near the water, their laughter cruel. At their center was a black girl, small and defiant, clutching a tattered book to her chest. Her braid was fraying, her dress streaked with dirt, but her eyes blazed, even as tears welled. "Go back to your side," one boy sneered, shoving her. Roger, heart pounding, had stepped forward without thinking. "Leave her alone," he'd said, his voice steadier than he felt. The bullies scattered, their taunts fading into the heat. The girl looked at him, her breath uneven, then pressed something into his palm, a handmade keychain, yellow and white threads woven into a daisy. "Thank you," she whispered before running off, her book still clutched tight. The memory snapped shut as Evelyn's voice cut through. "Roger, are you listening?" Her silver hair was pulled into a severe chignon, her eyes narrowing. "The Gala needs your presence. It's not optional." He nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, tethered to that daisy and the girl who'd given it. He excused himself, crossing to his study, a wood-paneled sanctuary lined with first editions, and a view of the estate's manicured gardens. There, in a drawer of forgotten relics, cufflinks, old pens, he found it. The keychain, its threads faded but intact, a fragile bridge to a moment he'd buried. He turned it over, the texture rough against his fingers. Could it be her? The question lodged in his chest, sharp and improbable. Outside, Cynthia knelt in the garden, tying Lily's stray shoelace from yesterday's play, her hands gentle but sure. She'd found the lace tangled in a rose bush, a small task no one else would notice. Her care for Lily was a language of its own, one the family barely acknowledged. Clara, passing by with a phone pressed to her ear, spared Cynthia a glance. Cool. Dismissive. The help shouldn't linger out here, she muttered to Martin later, her voice low but not low enough. Martin shrugged, his focus on a golf swing he was perfecting in the den. Evelyn was blunter, her words to Clara over tea. She's adequate for Lily, but let's not forget her place. The words were a blade, honed by years of privilege, and they cut through the air where Cynthia worked, unseen but not unheard. Roger, from his study window, caught the tail end of Clara's comment. His jaw tightened. He'd always tolerated his family's biases, chalking them up to generational gaps, but now they grated like sand in a wound. Cynthia wasn't just the help. She was the woman who'd turned his library into a battlefield of dreams, her textbooks a silent rebellion. He found himself watching her more closely, how she adjusted Lily's scarf with a tenderness that felt like art, how she murmured encouragements to the girl, decoding her jumbled syllables with patience no one else offered. When Lily returned from school, her face lit up at Cynthia's greeting, a trust that made the estate's cold elegance seem hollow. That afternoon, Roger joined Martin in the den, the air thick with cigar smoke and the clink of bourbon glasses. Martin, his face a softer echo of Roger's, was recounting a business deal. Roger cut in, his tone casual but pointed. "Cynthia's good for Lily, don't you think?" Martin paused, surprised. "She does her job," he said, noncommittal. "Lily likes her." Roger pressed. "More than likes. She trusts her. That's rare." Martin's brow furrowed, but he nodded, sensing the edge in Roger's voice. Clara, entering with a tray of canapes, caught the exchange. Her lips pursed, but she said nothing, her silence a concession she wasn't ready to voice. Roger returned to his study, the daisy keychain now on his desk, its faded petals a question mark. He traced its edges, the memory of that Texas creek, vivid again, the girl's defiance, her quiet gratitude. Cynthia's face superimposed itself over the girl's, their eyes sharing the same unyielding spark. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? The thought was absurd, yet it clung to him, a thread pulling taut across decades. He leaned back, the study's shadows deepening as the sun dipped low. The estate, with its relentless order, felt smaller now, its walls pressing in. Cynthia was no longer a shadow in his home. She was a presence, a puzzle, a flame he hadn't meant to notice. Downstairs, Cynthia folded Lily's jacket, her fingers lingering on the fabric. She didn't know Roger had seen her studying. Didn't. No, his thoughts were circling her like moths to a light. She only knew the weight of her books, the ticking clock of her exam, and the dream that kept her awake long after the estate slept. The daisy keychain, a relic of her childhood courage, was a memory she hadn't revisited in years. But fate, like the estate's glass walls, had a way of reflecting truths when least expected. And in that reflection, a spark from long ago was beginning to glow. The Gonzalez estate lay cloaked in midnight stillness, its glass walls swallowing the moon's pale glow. The chandeliers slept, their crystals dark, and the marble floors stretched like frozen rivers under the dim flicker of sconces. Silence ruled here, a sovereign that brooked no rebellion, except in the library where a single lamp burned, a defiant ember in the night. Cynthia Jones sat at the oak table, her world reduced to the circle of light. Textbooks lay open, their pages worn from her touch, annotated with her precise, slanted script. A laptop, second-hand and slow, hummed faintly, displaying a lecture slide on motor speech disorders. Her gray t-shirt clung to her shoulders, her cardigan discarded, as if the weight of her dream demanded every ounce of her being. Her lips moved, whispering terms, apraxia, dysarthria, like a prayer to a future she could almost taste. Cynthia's eyes, weary but fierce, traced the screen. She'd been at it for hours, stealing time after her duties ended, after Lily's bedtime stories and the estate's endless tasks. Her pencil scratched a note. Cranial nerve 7, articulation deficits. The clock on the wall ticked past 1, its hands indifferent to her exhaustion. She didn't hear the soft creak of the library door, didn't see Roger Gonzalez pause in the threshold, his silhouette framed by the hallway's shadow. He'd been restless, unable to sleep, the daisy keychain from yesterday still heavy in his pocket. Drawn by some unspoken pull, he'd wandered the estate, expecting darkness, not this, a scene that stopped his breath. Roger stood motionless, his tailored robe loose over his frame, hazel eyes fixed on Cynthia. Her focus was a force, a tide that seemed to reshape the room. The library, with its towering shelves and leather-bound tomes, felt alive under her gaze, as if her ambition had given it a pulse. He noted the stack of borrowed books, speech pathology essentials, neurogenic communication disorders. Their library stamps betraying her resourcefulness. A spiral notebook brimmed with diagrams, her handwriting a map of determination. Roger's chest tightened, not with surprise but with something deeper, a recognition of a fight he'd never had to wage. He stepped forward, his slipper soft against the rug, and cleared his throat gently. Cynthia startled, her pencil clattering to the table. Her eyes snapped up, wide with alarm, then softened into caution. "Mr. Gonzalez," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I'll clean up." She reached for her books, her hands trembling as if caught in a transgression. "You're not in trouble," Roger said, his tone softer than he intended. He leaned against the table's edge, keeping a distance to ease her. "What are you studying?" The question hung between them, simple but heavy, an invitation she hadn't expected. Cynthia hesitated, her fingers knotting together. Her gaze dropped to the textbook, then back to him, searching for judgment. Finding none, she exhaled. "Speech-language pathology," she said, her voice steadier now. "For a certification exam, online program. I want to help kids like Lily. Give them their voice." Her words carried a tremor, not of fear, but of something raw, a dream laid bare. Roger tilted his head, intrigued. "Why this path?" he asked, his voice low, coaxing. He'd seen her with Lily, her patience a kind of alchemy, but he wanted more, her story, her fire. Cynthia's lips parted, then closed. She looked at the lamp, its light pooling like a confession. "When I was a kid," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "my cousin Jamal lived with us. He was 9, I was 10. He stuttered badly. Kids at school tore him apart. Teachers called him slow, gave up. I'd sit with him at night, teaching him tricks to get words out. Slow breaths, tapping rhythms. It worked. He smiled more, spoke clearly. I saw what a voice could mean." Her eyes glistened, but she pressed on. "He died when we were teens, car accident. I promised I'd do this for him, for others like him." In the sunlit stillness of a billionaire's private library, a morning returns home turns into a moment he'll never forget. Hoping only to retrieve a forgotten document, he stumbles upon his black nanny, quiet, focused, and completely absorbed. In a world of study he never imagined she had. What is she doing? Why is she here before anyone else arrives? His surprise is written across his face, but what he doesn't yet know is that this moment will shake the walls of privilege around him. As prejudice quietly simmers within the household, her hidden dream and an old memory he buried long ago begin to collide. What connects this woman to his past? How far will she go to give children a voice? And can her voice survive being silenced? By the time you reach the end, one gesture will change more than one life. Stay with us. This story starts quietly, but it will leave a mark you won't forget. The Gonzalez estate rose from the crest of a manicured hill, its glass walls catching the first blush of dawn like a prism of untouchable wealth. To the world, it was a monument, sleek, modern, unyielding. To those within, it was a labyrinth of silence, where every polished surface reflected perfection but absorbed no warmth. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, their light more clinical than inviting. Fresh orchids, always white, stood in silver vases, replaced every third day with mechanical precision. The air carried a faint scent of jasmine, curated to please but never to linger. Classical music, Debussy perhaps, drifted from hidden speakers, but even its notes felt like an afterthought, unable to pierce the estate's pristine hush. Roger Gonzalez, 36, move through this world with the ease of a man born to it. His tailored navy suit hugged his frame, accentuating a jawline sharp enough to cut through boardroom tension. His dark hair, streaked faintly with silver, framed hazel eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. He was the estate's pulse, a billionaire whose tech empire funded this opulence, yet he carried a restlessness no merger could quell. He shared the mansion with his brother Martin, Martin's wife Clara, their daughter Lily, and their mother, Evelyn. A family bound by blood but divided by unspoken rules. Evelyn's stern gaze ruled the household, her voice a whip of propriety. Martin and Clara, both white like Roger, navigated their expectations with practiced deference, their lives a mirror of her rigid ideals. Lily, 7, was the exception, a flicker of chaos in her wide blue eyes, her laughter stifled by a speech disorder that tangled her words into knots. Cynthia Jones, 28, was Lily's nanny, a black woman whose presence was as deliberate as it was invisible. Her skin, a rich mahogany, glowed softly under the estate's cold lights, but her oversized cardigan and loose braid seemed designed to fade into the background. She moved like a breath, silent, essential, unnoticed. Each morning she rose. Before the sun, her small apartment in the city still dark as she drove to the estate. By 6 a.m., she was buckling Lily into the back of a sleek SUV, her voice a gentle hum as she navigated the girl's halting syllables. "Ready for school, sweet girl?" she'd ask, and Lily's nod, paired with a shy smile, was answer enough. Cynthia alone could decipher the child's jumbled words, a gift that made her indispensable to Lily, if not to the family. That morning, Cynthia's routine unfolded with its usual rhythm. She dropped Lily at school, the girl clutching her hand until the last moment. Back at the estate, she swept through the living room, her cloth gliding over mahogany tables until they shone. Dust dared not linger under her care. In the kitchen, she prepared Lily's lunch, a gluten-free wrap with avocado and turkey, sliced into perfect triangles, paired with apple wedges and a note. "You're my star." Her hands, calloused but steady, worked with a precision born of ritual, not obligation. She hummed a faint tune, a gospel melody from her Georgia childhood, its warmth a quiet rebellion against the estate's sterility. Roger, meanwhile, was halfway across the city, his mind on a merger that could redefine his company. He leaned back in his office chair, the skyline sprawling beyond his window, when a jolt of realization hit. The contract, crucial, irreplaceable, lay forgotten in the estate's library. He cursed under his breath, grabbed his keys, and drove. Back, the morning sun glinting off his Bentley's hood. The estate was quiet when he arrived, the family still at breakfast in the West Wing. He crossed the foyer, his footsteps echoing on marble, and pushed open the library's heavy oak door. He froze. Cynthia sat at the library's long oak table, a single desk lamp casting a golden pool around her. Textbooks sprawled before her, their spines cracked, pages dog-eared. A spiral notebook lay open, filled with dense, slanted handwriting, notes on articulation disorders, phonemic awareness, neural pathways. A pencil was tucked behind her ear, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wore no cardigan now, just a simple gray t-shirt, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her lips moved silently, rehearsing terms like dyspraxia and fluency shaping. The scene was fragile, sacred, a world Roger had never imagined within his walls. Cynthia, the nanny who faded into corners, was a light with purpose. He didn't move. To speak would shatter the moment, like a stone through stained glass. His eyes flicked to the textbook's title, Fundamentals of Speech-Language Pathology. The weight of it settled in his chest. Not just a book, but a dream, heavy and improbable. Cynthia, oblivious, turned a page, her pencil scratching a new note. Roger's gaze softened, tracing the curve of her jaw, the intensity in her eyes. She was no longer the shadow who served Lily's meals. She was a force, a fire banked but burning. He stepped back, the contract forgotten in his hand. The door closed soundlessly behind him, In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, his pulse uneven. Who was she? This woman who moved through his home like a ghost, yet carried such a blaze within. He made his way to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank slowly, the image of her bent over those books searing into him. Later, over coffee, he called for Mrs. Harrow, the house manager, her gray bun as severe as her manner. "Cynthia Jones," Roger said, his tone casual. "Tell me about her." Mrs. Harrow blinked, surprised. 3 years with us, sir, impeccable record. Came highly recommended from a family in Atlanta. She sends money to an aunt in Georgia. Raises her cousins, I believe. Never late, never complains. Keeps to herself. Roger nodded, but her words only deepened the mystery. 3 years, and he'd barely noticed her. How had she slipped through his world? Her ambition hidden behind folded linens and quiet steps? He glanced at the library door, now closed, and felt a stir he couldn't name. Not discomfort, but something sharper, like the first crack in a frozen lake. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, bathing the estate in light. But within its walls, a shadow had begun to shift. Cynthia returned to her tasks, unaware she'd been seen. She dusted the living room's gilt-framed portraits, her reflection fleeting in their glass. Roger, contract in hand, drove back to the city, his mind no longer on mergers. The library's lamp still burned in his thoughts, and with it, the woman who'd lit it. A spark had caught, small but undeniable in a house where nothing was meant to burn. The Gonzalez estate exhaled its morning hush, the dawn's golden light fracturing across glass walls into prisms of cold perfection. Within, the air was still, heavy with the weight of routines carved in stone. Cynthia Jones slipped through the corridors, her footsteps muffled on marble, a shadow in a house that demanded invisibility. She'd returned from dropping Lily at school, her hands already busy with a dust cloth, coaxing the living room's gilt-framed mirrors to a relentless shine. Her cardigan, a shade too large, hung loose over her frame as if to shield her from the estate's scrutiny. Yet her eyes, warm and resolute, betrayed a fire no amount of servitude could dim. She hummed softly, a fragment of a hymn. Amazing. Grace, its notes a quiet defiance against the mansion's sterile silence. Roger Gonzalez stood at the edge of the breakfast room, a porcelain coffee cup cooling in his hand. His tailored suit, charcoal gray today, framed a restlessness that clung to him like a second skin. The image of Cynthia in the library last night, bent over textbooks, her pencil a metronome of ambition, had rooted itself in his mind. A thorn he couldn't dislodge. He barely registered his mother Evelyn's voice, sharp as cut glass as she instructed Claire on the day's social calendar. Martin, his brother, nodded absently, his attention on a tablet displaying stock charts. Lily's absence, she was at school, left the room emptier, her laughter the only sound that ever seemed to belong here.